First story. The Case of Carlos de los Santos, 1989. It was late, and I had been driving through the desolate roads of Puebla for what felt like hours. The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that feels suffocating, like the world itself was holding its breath. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath my tires. I wasn't far from the small town I called home, but the isolation made everything feel distant, unreal. I remember looking up at the sky, expecting to see the usual pattern of stars, but instead there was a light, a bright, almost blinding beam coming down from the heavens. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't an airplane or a helicopter. It was a pure, unearthly glow, so intense that it made my vision blur. I felt an odd pull, like the light was calling to me. I tried to keep my focus, but it was as if the light was suffocating my mind, stealing my awareness. And then, everything went black. The next thing I remember was waking up with my heart racing, disoriented, and unable to comprehend what had just happened. My body felt strange, like it wasn't my own. I was lying on a cold metallic surface, and the air around me felt heavy, thick, almost as if I was breathing through a thick cloth. The place was sterile, unlike anything I had ever seen. The walls around me were a dull gray, with soft lights embedded in them. But that's when I saw them. Figures standing in the shadows, their forms almost blending with the dim surroundings. They were tall, their bodies thin and elongated. The skin, gray, almost ashy, seemed to shimmer slightly, like it was reflecting the soft light. Their faces, their eyes were the most unsettling part. Huge, black, oval-shaped eyes that seemed to see right through me. I couldn't look away. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know whether I was dreaming or awake, but something deep within me screamed that this was real. I tried to speak, but no words came out. It was as if my mouth wouldn't move, like my body wasn't responding to my commands. One of them, taller than the rest, moved closer, and I could feel the air around me grow colder, more oppressive. The others didn't say a word, but their presence was overwhelming. They began to examine me, prodding and touching my body in a way that felt wrong. It wasn't painful, but the sensation was invasive, uncomfortable in a way that I can't explain. I could feel them touching my skin, their cold fingers tracing along my arms, my legs. They didn't speak, but I could sense their curiosity, their scrutiny. It wasn't just physical, it felt like they were digging into my mind, probing my thoughts. I couldn't resist. I was helpless, paralyzed by a fear I had never known. I felt like I was being torn apart, piece by piece, not in a physical sense, but emotionally. It was as though they were stripping away everything that made me human. Time, if you could even call it time, seemed to stretch and warp in that place. My sense of reality felt like it was slipping away, like I was no longer bound by the rules of the world I knew. The moments blended together, as if I was trapped in a loop that didn't make sense. I don't know how long I was there, but it felt like hours, maybe longer. The creatures, if you could even call them that, continued their examination, moving around me in a slow, deliberate manner. They didn't speak, but their movements were precise, as if they were conducting some sort of ritual. One of them approached me with a strange device. It looked like a small silver rod, and when it touched my skin I felt a sharp sting, almost like electricity coursing through me. My body jolted involuntarily, but I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't even scream. The pain was unlike anything I had experienced, but it wasn't the physical pain that haunted me the most. It was the violation. It was as though they were taking something from me, not just my body, but my very essence. And in those brief moments when I thought I could escape, when I thought I might wake up from this nightmare, I realized the horror wasn't just in their actions. It was in the way they were silently controlling everything around me. There was no escape. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The buzzing hum in the air, the oppressive silence, the sensation of being watched, it all vanished in an instant. I was left alone, lying on that cold metal surface, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I wanted to move, to stand up, to get away from whatever this place was, but my body refused to respond. It felt like I was still locked in some kind of dream, like my body was still trapped in that alien space, but my mind was no longer there. I could barely focus, but I remember the moment clearly, when I finally gathered the strength to push myself off the cold metal. I realized something was terribly wrong. I wasn't where I had been before. I wasn't on the road anymore. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but desolate land. The sky above was dark, not like the night sky I remembered, but unnaturally dark, almost like it was pressing down on me. I looked around, desperate to make sense of my surroundings, but everything felt wrong. The ground beneath my feet was dry, cracked, like it had never been touched by rain. There were no sounds, no animals, no signs of life. Just the oppressive quiet, the same silence I had felt inside the ship. I couldn't even remember how I got here, or how much time had passed. As I stumbled forward, trying to make sense of what had happened, I felt a strange sensation crawling up my spine, like something was watching me. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. I looked up at the sky, expecting to see stars or the faint glow of the moon, but it was all pitch black, void of any light. It wasn't right. None of this was right. I tried to make sense of it all, but my mind felt scrambled, like the memories I had of the events were slipping away, fading into a fog. I wanted to scream, to yell out for help, but I knew it was useless. There was no one. No one to hear me, no one to understand what had happened to me. I felt the fear crawling up my throat, choking me. And that's when I noticed something strange. On the side of my neck there were marks, small circular impressions, almost like burn marks, but they weren't hot to the touch. They were cold. I couldn't remember how they had gotten there, but I knew that they weren't normal. They looked like something had pressed into my skin, hard enough to leave an imprint, but soft enough to not break the surface. My stomach churned as I realized that whatever had happened, whatever those things had done to me, wasn't over. I hadn't been let go. I had been marked. As I stood there, staring at those marks on my skin, something else hit me. My sense of time was completely shattered. I couldn't figure out what day it was or how long I had been missing. Hours, days, I had no idea. My mind felt like it was operating on a different level, trying to piece together fragments of what happened. But it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. The road where I had been driving should have been just a few minutes away, but everything around me felt alien, unfamiliar. I couldn't tell if I had been transported somewhere else, or if what I'd just experienced had somehow altered reality itself. The thought of going back to my car, if it was still there, filled me with dread. I didn't want to be near anything that might remind me of that moment. The terror I felt wasn't just in the physical world anymore. It had crawled inside me, into my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more the fear gnawed at me. What had they done to me? Was I still the same? But then, as I started walking again, something pulled my attention away from my own spiraling thoughts. A flicker of light, just a glimmer. It was so faint that at first I thought I was imagining it. But there it was again, far in the distance, moving toward me. I froze, my body tense, every muscle screaming to run. But I couldn't. The light, this time more distinct, cutting through the dark like a knife, was growing brighter. And as it got closer, I could see that it wasn't just a light. It was a vehicle, a car, but not one I recognized. It was different. The design was sleek, like nothing I had ever seen before. It wasn't like any car I knew, not like the old trucks or even newer models. It had sharp, angular edges, almost too perfect to be made by human hands. I had the strangest feeling that this wasn't a rescue. It was another test, another encounter. My pulse quickened. Should I run? Should I try to hide? The car, or whatever it was, pulled up beside me slowly, almost unnaturally so, as if it was waiting for me to make the first move. My body was frozen, not just by fear, but by something else. There was an overwhelming sense of inevitability that I couldn't shake. The door opened, but no one got out. The car, if that's even what it was, just sat there, its headlights now dimmed, casting a soft glow on the dry, cracked earth beneath me. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming for me to run, to get as far away as possible, but my feet were stuck. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And then, as if responding to my hesitation, a voice came through the air, not from the car, but from everywhere surrounding me. It wasn't spoken. It was more like a thought that was placed in my head. Get in. The words weren't harsh or commanding, but they were cold, detached. Almost like the voice didn't care if I listened or not. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive. It was the voice of something far beyond what I understood. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to escape this, whatever it was. But my feet stayed frozen to the ground, as if some unseen force was holding me in place. The voice in my head wasn't pushing me, it wasn't threatening, it was just there, calm and emotionless, as if it was simply stating a fact, as if it knew I would eventually get in. There was no fear in it, just an eerie confidence, and that made it worse. I had never felt anything like that before. It wasn't just that the voice wasn't human, it felt like I was being controlled by it, like I didn't have the freedom to make a choice. The worst part was that it wasn't trying to make me do anything I didn't already feel compelled to do. Deep down, there was this strange pull, like a magnetic force drawing me toward that vehicle. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I might lose control, that I would just walk toward it, not even knowing why. But somehow, I managed to turn away. I stumbled back, my legs unsteady, almost falling on the dry ground, my hands shaking, as I tried to back away. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. If I got in that car, if I let whatever it was take me, I might never come back. I don't know how long I stood there facing that damn car, but time seemed to slow even more. The air around me felt thicker, heavier. It wasn't just the oppressive silence that had followed me. It was as if everything had fallen still, waiting for something to happen. The light from the car's headlights now seemed almost comforting in a way, like it was lulling me into a false sense of security. But there was nothing comforting about it. My mind flashed back to the strange figures on the ship. Their gray, cold skin, their huge black eyes, the way they had examined me with such impassive detachment. And then, without warning, the air shifted. I felt it before I saw it. A heavy pressure, like something was coming. It wasn't a wind or a change in the weather. It was a shift in the very fabric of the world around me. It felt like the ground beneath me wasn't as solid as it should be, like reality itself was bending and warping, as if it were about to break open. I turned my head, scanning the horizon, but I saw nothing except the distant outline of a mountain range. But then I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the road. It wasn't human. It wasn't like the beings I had seen before, but it was close enough that I felt my heart stop in my chest. It was tall, much taller than any person, and its shape was distorted, its limbs too long, too thin. It didn't move at first. It just stood there staring at me with those massive eyes. And I knew in that moment that this wasn't just some trick of the mind. Whatever had taken me, whatever had marked me, it was still here, and it was watching me. My body finally betrayed me. I didn't move toward the car. I didn't run toward the figure. But I did something else. Something that, even now, I'm not entirely sure was me. I stumbled forward, my feet dragging me toward the figure, toward that strange presence that felt like it was pulling me with an invisible thread. It wasn't a choice I made. It wasn't even a decision. It was more like I was being led by something far beyond my understanding, like I had no control over my own actions. And with every step, the air around me felt colder, darker. The figure, if you could even call it that, didn't speak. But I felt the voice in my head again, not saying anything specific, but guiding me, urging me forward. The closer I got, the more I could feel that sense of wrongness creeping up my spine. But it wasn't the figure itself that terrified me. It was the feeling that everything, every inch of this experience was part of a plan, something far larger than I could comprehend. I didn't know if I was being watched by those gray beings from the ship, or if something else was observing me, but I knew I wasn't alone in whatever this was. I wasn't meant to understand it. I wasn't meant to escape it. I was just part of it. As I approached the figure, my thoughts were no longer coherent. It was as if something in my mind had snapped, and I could no longer keep up with the racing questions in my head. What was happening to me? Was I still in the same world? Was I even still human? The closer I got to that thing standing in front of me, the less it felt like I was in control of my own body. I reached out a hand almost mechanically, as if I was simply following instructions. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, I felt a jolt of cold so intense it nearly knocked the breath out of me. But the shock wasn't physical. It was like I had just touched something far more complex, something that cut through the very essence of who I was. My body trembled, and I could feel my pulse racing in my throat. For a brief second, I wondered if this was it, if this was where it all ended. I didn't know if I would disappear like I had before, or if this would be the final step in whatever twisted journey I was on. I wanted to pull my hand back, to break free from whatever had a hold of me, but I couldn't. My body was no longer mine to control. The thing, or whatever it was, didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence in any way. But that pressure, that unsettling feeling, only grew stronger. It was as if it knew me, as if it had always known me. And with that thought, the sensation that I was being manipulated, controlled, intensified. Then, like a switch was flipped, I was somewhere else. 1 second I was standing there touching that creature. Or maybe it wasn't a creature, I don't know. And the next I was back in the middle of the road where I had first been struck by that light. But nothing was the same. The air was thick, almost sticky, and the faint glow from the streetlights felt distant, muted, like they were being filtered through fog. My head was spinning, my vision blurred as if my brain was having trouble catching up with the present moment. I looked around, disoriented, and my first instinct was to run. But my legs were weak, my movements slow, like I had aged years in a matter of seconds. I stumbled, falling to my knees on the rough asphalt, barely able to catch my breath. Panic surged through me, and for a moment I thought I was going to lose consciousness again. But somehow I managed to stay awake, to stay present. The marks on my neck still throbbed, a constant reminder of what had happened, or what had been done to me. And as the distant roar of a car's engine approached, I realized that nothing about this was ever going to be normal again. The world felt off, like a distorted reflection of itself. And that's when it hit me. Whatever had happened, whatever this was, it wasn't over. It wasn't just one encounter. It had changed something in me, and it was going to follow me wherever I went. I don't know how I managed to get back home. It's all a blur. I don't remember the drive or how I got out of that place in the middle of nowhere. My mind kept returning to that figure, to the sensation of my skin crawling when I touched it. There's this deep, gnawing feeling inside of me now, like there's something wrong, something fundamentally altered about my very being. I've tried to convince myself that maybe I was just dreaming. Maybe it was a strange hallucination, the result of stress or lack of sleep, or some kind of psychological break. But every time I look in the mirror, I see those marks on my neck. Cold to the touch, but ever present. The scars are not just physical, they're deeper than that. I feel different, changed. And I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that they're still watching, still waiting. I don't know if they will come back for me, but I know I'll never forget what happened. It's always there, lurking at the edge of my thoughts. I can't explain it, can't make sense of it, but the fear is always with me, following me like a shadow. I'm telling you this because I don't know what else to do. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. I keep hearing things, whispers, in my mind that I can't quite understand. They're not voices, they're just feelings, thoughts that don't belong to me. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can see them. The same figures from that place, standing just outside my window, watching me. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending like everything's normal. I can't escape this. It's like they've tethered me to whatever world they're from. So I'm reaching out, hoping someone out there has experienced something similar. I don't know if this will make any sense to you, but I need to know if I'm not the only one. If you've felt it too, that same cold, that same sense of being watched. I'm not crazy. I know what happened to me, and I'm terrified that it's far from over. Second story, The Abduction of Jim O'Connell, 1975. I don't know how to start this. I wish I could just forget what happened. But that night, the night in 1975, it changed everything. It's been decades, but the memories still haunt me, still feel so vivid like they happened yesterday. I don't know what I saw, what happened to me, or how it all ended. But I know it was real. and if you'd been there, you'd understand. It started with the usual drive. I was on a deserted stretch of road in the California desert. Nothing around me but the dark sky and the occasional flicker of distant lights. Just me, the road, and the hum of the car. It's peaceful in a way, but also isolating. And that night, it felt wrong. Like something was out of place. At first I thought it was just me being paranoid. But then I saw it. A bright light in the distance, too bright, too fast. It wasn't an airplane or a helicopter or anything I'd ever seen before. The light grew bigger, like it was coming straight for me. I slammed the brakes, pulled over, and just stared at it, frozen. It was a disc, a big metallic disc, hovering above the road. No sound, no movement except for that pulsing light. I should have run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed just staring at it. The next thing I remember, I was inside something. Not a car, not a building. It was like a room, but not a room I could recognize. The walls were smooth, metallic, and the air was cold, sterile. I could barely move. My body felt heavy, like I was being held down by something I couldn't see. And then I saw them, the beings. They weren't human, not like anything I'd ever imagined. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and they had these huge black eyes that seemed to go on forever. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I tried. I swear I did. But nothing came out. They were standing around me, examining me. I don't know what they did to me, but I felt like they were inside me, probing, touching, digging into my mind. I remember feeling a coldness in my chest, like something was being pulled out of me. I could hear them, or maybe I just sensed their thoughts, their intentions. They weren't speaking, but it was like I understood them. They were calm, detached, like they had done this 1,000 times before. I wasn't a person to them. I was just an experiment. Time didn't make sense. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. I couldn't tell. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to remember how I got there, how I was going to get out. I couldn't focus on anything for long enough to understand what they were doing to me. I remember the cold, the absolute cold of the place. But I also remember the warmth that came when they touched me. And the pain. God, the pain. It wasn't physical, not in the way I thought pain was supposed to feel. It was a burning sensation. Deep inside my body, I felt like I was being stretched, pulled apart. But at the same time, I felt like I was in the most intense dream of my life. A dream I couldn't wake up from. They kept coming closer, and each time I felt my body weaken, like I was being drained. I wanted to fight back, scream, do anything, but I couldn't. The fear was paralyzing. And when I finally found my voice, when I finally screamed, everything stopped. The lights went out. The next thing I remember, I was back in the car. At least I thought I was. But something was wrong. I looked around, and the world was different. The desert landscape was still there, but it felt off. The road seemed longer than I remembered, and the sky, it wasn't the same. It was darker, like it had swallowed the daylight. I looked at the dashboard, and the time didn't make sense. Hours had passed, but it felt like mere minutes. It was as if the hands of time had been manipulated, stolen from me. I checked my watch. Nothing had changed on it, but the world around me had. It was like I was in the same place but somehow lost. And then it hit me. I wasn't alone. I was never alone. Something had followed me, something I couldn't see. My heart started racing again. The panic was back, sharper than before. I tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the engine was frozen in place. That's when I noticed it. The mark. It was on my wrist, like an incision, or maybe a scar, something I didn't recognize. It was faint, but it was there, and I could feel it burning, like it was reacting to the air. I tried to touch it, but the pain was intense. My skin felt like it was being scraped from the inside. I had to get out of there. I managed to start the car and drive off, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The road seemed endless, stretching on and on, like I was going nowhere. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing, just the black void of the desert behind me. I couldn't stop thinking about the beings, the way they had surrounded me, the way they had touched me. I didn't know what to think, what to believe. I was in shock, I guess. There was no other way to explain the numbness. The way my body felt like it was on autopilot, doing what it had to do to get me home. I remember reaching for the phone, dialing 911, but the operator couldn't understand what I was saying. I could barely even form the words. I kept repeating the same thing over and over. I've been taken. I need help. I'm not sure if they ever took me seriously, but I didn't care. I needed someone to understand, to believe me. As I finally pulled into my driveway, I felt this wave of exhaustion wash over me. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to go somewhere, anywhere. But before I could even get out of the car, the door swung open, and I was greeted by a voice, someone I didn't know. The voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was something wrong about it. I couldn't place it at first, but the moment they spoke, I felt that same sense of unease I had felt when I first saw the lights in the sky. They told me I needed to sit down, that they would help me, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't let anyone near me, not after everything I'd been through. I just wanted to run, to get away from whatever it was that had followed me. But they were too close, too persistent. They kept asking questions, offering help, but I couldn't explain it. I didn't have the words to describe the horrors I'd experienced. My mind was still reeling. I couldn't process it. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I kept trying to shake them off, to get them to leave me alone, but the fear was overpowering. My body felt heavy, like I was being pulled in all directions. The mark on my wrist burned again, sharper this time. It felt like it was alive, like it was trying to crawl under my skin. I looked at the person in front of me, but they weren't real. They couldn't be. No one could have known what had happened to me, what I'd seen, unless they were a part of it. It wasn't until I looked into their eyes that I realized they were one of them. A cold, empty gaze that mirrored the beings I had encountered. It wasn't a person, it was something else, something watching me. At that moment, everything in my body screamed to run, to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like my body was no longer my own, like it had been taken over by something I couldn't understand. The coldness in my chest returned, the same icy grip that had gripped me when I was aboard that craft. The mark on my wrist burned with intensity. It felt like it was pulling me toward them, drawing me into their presence. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to lift my hand, to defend myself in some way, but I couldn't. I was trapped in my own skin. The being in front of me was still speaking, but the words didn't make sense anymore. They were just noises, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could feel them digging into my mind again, just like before, and I couldn't stop it. It was like they were rewriting my thoughts, pushing me to forget everything, to accept what had happened, to let them do whatever they wanted. I felt my eyelids growing heavy, as if I was going to pass out. And that's when I finally understood. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't help. This was all part of the same thing. I had never left. I was still trapped in their web. I don't know how long I stayed in that trance-like state. But when I came to, I was lying on the ground, staring up at the sky. It was dark, but it wasn't the same darkness I had seen before. It felt suffocating, like the air had changed, like something had shifted in the atmosphere. I slowly sat up, disoriented, my body aching like I had been through something brutal. The pain in my wrist was gone, but the mark was still there, faint but unmistakable. I looked around and I was no longer on the road. I was somewhere else. It didn't look familiar, and it wasn't right. The ground beneath me felt soft, almost like sand, but there was no desert, no mountains, no road, just nothing. I stood up slowly, unsure of where to go. I wanted to run, to find help, but I couldn't make sense of anything anymore. And then I heard it. That sound again, the same hum from before. It was faint, like a distant buzzing, but it was there. I looked up, and the sky above me was no longer a sky I recognized. It was darker, swirling like it was alive, and in the middle of that swirling blackness, I saw it. The craft, the same disc-shaped object. It was floating, hovering, waiting. The same light that had paralyzed me before pulsed, and for the first time I felt real fear. I wanted to scream, to beg for someone, anyone to help me, but there was no one. The world around me was empty, like I was the last person on Earth. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel them, those beings somewhere out there, watching me, waiting for something. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel their eyes on me. I couldn't move. My body was stiff, my mind racing, but I couldn't think clearly. I wasn't sure if I was awake or if I was still trapped in some kind of nightmare, some twisted dream I couldn't escape from. I tried to move my legs, but it felt like they were cemented to the ground. The air was heavy, thick, like I couldn't breathe right. I turned around, hoping to find some kind of sign, some way to escape, but there was nothing, just the swirling darkness and the craft above. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the buzzing stopped. The light went out, and everything became silent. I stood there in that oppressive silence for what felt like an eternity. My chest tight, my mind racing, unsure of what was happening, unsure of what had happened to me. And then, without warning, the world shifted again. The moment the light went out, it was like the whole world snapped back into place. The air felt less heavy, less suffocating. For a brief second, I thought maybe I had imagined it all, the light, the beings, the fear. But the sensation in my chest, that cold emptiness, didn't go away. It lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I looked around again, trying to make sense of where I was, but everything was still wrong. The sky had a strange reddish hue now, and the ground, though familiar in texture, seemed more alien, more unwelcoming. As I took a step forward, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A trail of footprints. I had never seen footprints like these. They were large, too large for any human, and they led off into the distance, away from me, into the thickening mist. It felt like a sign, a message I didn't want to understand. My legs moved on their own, following the strange path. I didn't want to go, but my body didn't give me a choice. I felt like I was being drawn along, pulled by something far stronger than willpower. The footprints seemed to go on forever, leading me deeper into the strange, empty landscape. It was as if the world around me had been deliberately constructed to confuse and disorient me. The farther I walked, the more I felt that sense of wrongness creep into my bones. There were no animals, no birds, no sounds of life. Everything was dead. No wind, no rustling of leaves, just silence. And then I saw something in the distance. It wasn't much, just a shape standing tall against the strange reddish sky. At first I thought it was another being, another one of those figures I had seen before. But as I approached, I realized it wasn't humanoid at all. It was a structure, tall, thin, and almost crystalline, reflecting the strange light around it. It looked like some kind of tower, but it wasn't made of any material I recognized. It seemed to shimmer, as though it wasn't entirely real, like it was flickering between dimensions. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I had to get closer. Something deep inside me told me that I had to. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the pull of the aliens, or maybe it was just my fear making me do things I didn't fully understand. But I knew somehow that this was where everything was headed. This was the point I'd been walking toward since I first saw that light in the sky. It was impossible to turn back. As I neared the structure, the air grew even colder, and the buzzing sound returned, louder now, filling my head. It wasn't coming from the sky or from the craft. It was coming from within me. The same hum, the same vibrating frequency I had heard before. It was all around me, in my skull, in my chest, reverberating through my bones. I stopped in front of the tower, feeling the energy radiating from it. My whole body seemed to be vibrating along with it, like it was syncing with my heartbeat, my breath. I didn't know if I was supposed to enter or if I was meant to just stand there, to wait. But the feeling was overwhelming, like I was being pulled into something beyond my comprehension. The tower's surface shimmered, and without any warning, a door appeared. It slid open, silently, inviting me in. And just like that, all my resistance, all my fear, disappeared. I stepped forward, and as I crossed the threshold, I felt everything inside me shift. The world I had known, the life I had lived, was gone. It didn't exist here. All that remained was that cold, alien hum vibrating through every part of me. Soon as I stepped through the doorway, everything changed. It felt like I was no longer in the same dimension, if I can even call it that. The air inside the tower was thick, dense, and the lighting was dim but not quite dark. There were no clear sources of illumination, yet the space was lit from within, casting an eerie glow on everything. The walls seemed alive, shifting and changing like they were breathing, and I swear I could hear whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs, as though something was watching me from every direction. I had to keep moving. I wasn't sure if I was walking or floating, but my body obeyed an instinct I couldn't deny. The silence around me was suffocating, and the only sound that existed was that constant buzzing, the hum deep in my skull. I could feel it vibrating through my fingertips, my bones, and it was like the very air was alive with it. The floor beneath my feet felt wrong too. It wasn't solid, more like a gelatinous surface that subtly shifted with every step I took, as though the ground was aware of my presence. I moved further into the structure, the hall narrowing as I walked. The deeper I went, the more it felt like I was losing myself, like I was becoming a part of this place. And that thought, it scared me more than I can say. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone following me. But no one was there, just the oppressive quiet, the hum, and the bizarre sensation that something, they, were observing me from every angle. I found myself standing in front of a door, not even realizing how I had gotten there. The door, unlike the rest of the tower, was starkly different. It was not shimmering or breathing. It was made of something hard, metallic, like it didn't belong in this strange, fluid place. My hand reached for the handle before I could even think about it, like something inside me knew it was the right thing to do. As I turned the handle and pushed the door open, I was met with a blinding light. At first it burned my eyes, but then, as I blinked and adjusted, I realized it wasn't just light. It was a room full of them. The beings, they were there, standing, floating. I don't know how to describe them. They weren't like anything I had seen before, and they weren't humanoid in the way I had expected. Their bodies seemed to blend with the light itself, their features constantly shifting and morphing in ways that made my head hurt just looking at them. They weren't tall or short, but the way they moved, like they weren't fully bound by the same laws of nature I understood, was unnerving. They didn't walk. They glided, like they were being carried by some invisible force. I couldn't look directly at them. Every time I tried, my eyes would start to burn, and the buzzing in my head would get worse. But I knew they were there, watching me. I wanted to scream, to run. But my body wasn't mine anymore. It felt like I was a puppet, strings pulled by some force beyond my control. The air inside the room was thick, suffocating. It was hard to breathe. I felt like they were inside my mind again, like they were crawling through my thoughts, digging into the places I didn't want them to find. And then, one of them stepped forward or shifted forward, I don't know. It felt like it was happening in slow motion, like I couldn't fully grasp what was happening. But as it got closer, I could feel its presence in my chest, like it was pressing on my heart. I was paralyzed again. The moment it got close enough, I felt it. It wasn't physical, but it was like an electric shock shot through me, not in my body, but through my mind. It was like they were trying to get in again, to rewrite my thoughts, to make me forget everything I had experienced. I wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, but it was like my voice had been taken. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was frozen in place. The air thickened and the hum grew louder until it was the only thing I could hear. It was deafening. Then, in an instant, it all stopped. Just like that. The buzzing, the pressure, the light, it was gone. I blinked, I looked around. The beings had disappeared. The room, or whatever it had been, was now just a dark, empty space. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like I had never been there, like the whole thing had been erased. I was left standing there, alone, in that empty, hollow place. No sounds, no signs of life. I turned around and ran, or at least I tried to. I couldn't even tell how I was moving anymore. It was like my legs were on autopilot, and I had no control over what was happening. I just wanted to get out. I didn't know where I was or how I got there, but I had to get out. I kept running, the ground shifting beneath me, and then I felt it. The pull. That same cold sensation from before, like they were still inside me, pulling me back, and then, just like that, I woke up. I woke up on the side of the road, just outside of town. It was daylight, but everything felt wrong. I felt disoriented, like I had just stepped out of a dream, but the pain in my body told me otherwise. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how long I had been gone. I reached for my wrist, and the mark was still there. It was faint, but it was there. I tried to make sense of it all, but I couldn't. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had been changed. Something inside me was different, and even now, years later, I can still feel them. Watching, waiting. I don't know if I'll ever be able to escape it, but I can't forget. No matter how hard I try, I can't forget what happened to me that night. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story, The Case of Paul, The Forest That Took Me, 1990. I don't know how to start this, but I feel like I need to share what happened. In 1990, I was just another regular guy, living in a quiet town in the UK. At the time, I liked going on walks, just to clear my head. I spent a lot of time in the forest near my house, away from everything and everyone. It was one of those days when the air had that crisp, almost heavy feel to it, like it was about to rain, but it never did. I remember walking down a narrow path through the trees when I first saw it. It wasn't a plane or a helicopter, nothing like that. It was this huge, bright object in the sky. I thought I was just imagining it at first, but it wasn't moving like anything I had ever seen. It was slow, almost deliberate, as if it was coming toward me. It wasn't until it was really close that I realized it was coming down, and fast. I froze. It was like everything stopped, but I couldn't look away. I felt this pressure in my chest, like something heavy was pressing down on me. Then, out of nowhere, I was no longer standing on that path. 1 second I was looking up at this thing, and the next, nothing. I was gone. I don't even remember exactly what happened after that, but the next thing I knew, I was somewhere else. I couldn't tell where I was, but it wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The air felt thick, and I couldn't move. There was a coldness to the place, a silence so deep that it made my ears ring. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I couldn't see anything clearly at first, just shadows, like there were figures moving around me. And then, they came into focus. I can't explain what they looked like. Humanoid, but not human, if that makes sense. Their skin was almost translucent, glowing faintly in the dim light, and their eyes, God, their eyes. They were black, no pupils, just empty voids that seemed to see right through me. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in, and my heart was racing. They moved toward me, and before I could react, they started examining me. I don't know how to describe it. They didn't speak, but I knew what they wanted. It was like my body was not mine anymore. They were touching me, poking, prodding, and I couldn't move or scream. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours. Time felt warped, like I wasn't even in the same place anymore. The pain was unbearable. It wasn't just physical pain, it was in my mind too, like they were reaching into me and pulling out thoughts, memories, things I didn't even know I had. I remember one of them getting really close to my face, and I felt this coldness, this presence in my head. My vision started to blur, and I could hear something, voices, whispers, but they weren't words. They were impressions, if that makes sense. Images flashing through my mind, fragments of things I couldn't grasp. I felt like I was losing myself, like they were taking me apart, piece by piece. And just when I thought I couldn't handle it anymore, everything stopped. The pressure, the pain, the feeling of being pulled apart, gone as suddenly as it started. But that didn't mean I was free. I woke up in the forest again, lying on the ground, the sky above me just as it had been before. I couldn't move at first, couldn't understand what had just happened. It felt like I was still dreaming. The whole world seemed off. Everything was too sharp, too clear, like I was seeing it all for the first time. And there was this ringing in my ears, like I hadn't heard properly in days. I tried to stand, but my legs, they didn't work right. My body felt wrong, like I didn't belong in it anymore. When I finally managed to get up, everything felt too quiet. The forest, the trees, even the ground beneath me. It was like I had been dropped into a different world, one that didn't quite match the one I remembered. I was disoriented, and, for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely scared. It wasn't the fear of being lost in the woods. It was a deeper, more unsettling fear. As I stumbled my way out of the forest, the oddest thing started happening. I could hear things, not just the usual sounds of the forest, but voices, distant, low, like they were coming from far away, even though I was alone. They were talking to me, or at least that's what it felt like. And these weren't normal thoughts. They were fragmented, disjointed, as if pieces of someone else's memories were seeping into mine. The whispers, the images, everything was starting to bleed together. I didn't know what was real anymore. I started to think I was going crazy. But then I remembered what had happened. I remembered those figures, those beings, and the way they had touched me, examined me. I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't some fever dream. It was real, and the real horror of it was that I couldn't escape it. When I finally made it back home, everything felt different. I was different. The first few days were a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop shaking, and there were the dreams. God, the dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, it was like I was back there in that strange place. I'd see those beings, their empty eyes staring at me, and I'd feel that same pressure, that same coldness. Sometimes I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, only to realize that I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was in my bed, in my house, and everything was supposed to be normal. But it wasn't. Something inside me had changed. I felt like I was being watched. There were moments when I'd see things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving in the dark, or the sound of something, someone, breathing behind me when I was alone. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. I tried to tell people, but no one understood. They all thought I was just having a breakdown, maybe from the stress of being lost or something. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what had happened to me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken me, whatever had done those things to me, was still out there, watching, waiting. Then came the flashes. At first, they were just random. A split second of something, like an image or a sound that didn't quite make sense. It was almost like my mind was trying to piece together memories that weren't mine. One night, I was sitting in my living room, staring at the walls, when I saw it. A flash. Bright. Too bright to be anything I recognized. For a second I saw what looked like the inside of a ship, metal walls, strange lights, and a feeling of utter isolation. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. I couldn't breathe. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how long I stayed like that. But when I came to my senses, I was standing in the middle of my living room, trembling, with no idea how much time had passed. These flashes, these memories, started happening more often. I'd hear voices again, but they weren't whispers anymore. They were clearer. I'd see things that weren't there. People, places, objects. I couldn't make sense of it. I even started finding marks on my body, small things at first, bruises, scratches. Sometimes I'd wake up with strange rashes, or burns on my skin that I couldn't explain. And that ringing in my ears, it never went away. I'd go to the doctor, but they'd tell me it was just stress, just anxiety. They never saw what I saw. No one did. The worst part was when I started to lose track of time. I'd go to bed, exhausted, and then I'd wake up hours later, but it felt like minutes had passed. Some nights I'd wake up with my sheets tangled around me, my clothes soaked in sweat, my body sore in places I couldn't explain. I didn't know if I was dreaming, if it was a side effect of whatever had happened to me, or if something else was going on. But the longer it went on, the more I started to think that it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. Something was happening, and I couldn't stop it. The images, the sensations, they grew more vivid. I'd see flashes of metal walls, again those cold, sterile environments, and hear the same haunting voices. But now, they were getting clearer. One night, I woke up with a start, my breath coming out in gasps. I felt like something was right there with me, standing just beyond my reach, waiting for me to notice. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, and as the light flickered on, I saw it. For a split second, I swear I saw one of those beings standing by the window looking in at me. Its black eyes locked with mine, and in that instant I knew I wasn't imagining any of this. I had been marked somehow, and whatever had taken me, whatever had done those things to me, was still with me. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. The dreams, the flashes, the feeling that I was being watched, it all started to consume me. I couldn't escape it. I stopped going outside, stopped seeing friends, stopped trying to go back to normal. Nothing felt normal anymore. I tried to reach out to others who might understand, maybe find someone else who had experienced what I did. But when I searched online, all I found were people who sounded as lost as I was. Strangers telling stories about lights in the sky, missing time, strange markings on their bodies. I didn't feel crazy anymore, but I didn't feel comforted either. I didn't find any answers, just more questions. The worst part was when I started to realize that this wasn't just some random encounter. This had happened to me for a reason. Those beings, they hadn't just come for me out of curiosity. They had done something to me, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just a freak accident or a mistake. They had left something inside me, something that I couldn't get rid of, and I knew deep down that whatever it wasn't going to let go. Not until it was done with me. A few weeks ago I had another episode. It started like all the others, random. Flashes of images, voices in my head, that feeling of being pulled out of my body. But this time it felt different. It wasn't just a memory or a flash. It felt like I was back there, in that cold, sterile place. I could smell the metal, hear the hum of machines, feel the weight of the air pressing down on me. I woke up, gasping for breath, my hands shaking. But when I opened my eyes, everything was exactly the same. I was still in my bed, still in my room. I thought it was another dream, another flash. But something felt wrong. When I checked the time, I realized that hours had passed, hours I couldn't account for. I had no memory of what happened during those hours. The clock said it was 2 a.m., but I could have sworn I'd just gone to sleep at midnight. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling, the dread, the nausea, the terror stayed with me. And that was the moment I realized something that still haunts me. I'm not the same person I was before. I'm not the same person I was when I stepped into that forest. Whatever happened to me that day, whatever they did to me, it changed me in ways I can't explain. And the worst part is, I don't think I'll ever be the same again. I've tried to move on, I really have. I've gone back to my normal routine, pretended everything is okay. But every day it's the same. The flashes, the voices, the feeling that something's always just behind me. I can't escape it. It's not like I'm constantly aware of it, but it's there, lurking. It's like an invisible weight pressing down on me, reminding me that whatever I experienced wasn't a one-time thing. It never stopped. Every now and then, I catch myself staring into the sky, wondering if they'll come back. If that ship will appear again, and if I'll be dragged away. I don't tell people this because I don't want them to think I'm crazy. They'd never understand. Even when I try to explain it to myself, I don't know what I'm feeling. I can't even begin to describe the emptiness that lingers inside me. There's this coldness, this hollow space where memories should be, memories that were erased or maybe just hidden away. I've tried to get help, tried to go to doctors, but no one can explain what's happening. No one has an answer. I'm left to deal with it alone, with the constant dread that I'm not truly free, that they're still watching, still waiting. The most terrifying part is that I don't know what they want from me. I've thought about it so many times, trying to piece it all together. Why me? Why that day? I didn't see anything special about myself. I wasn't out there looking for something. I was just walking through the forest, minding my own business. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it doesn't matter who I am. Maybe it was just the right time, the right place. I remember everything now, or at least what little I can piece together. The experiments, they weren't random. They were too precise, too methodical. I've spent nights lying awake, wondering what exactly they took from me. And then there are the memories I can't get back, the pieces that are missing. It's like there's something I should know, something I should have figured out by now, but no matter how hard I try, I can't remember it. It's just gone, like it was never there. And that, more than anything, scares me the most. Because if they took that from me, then what else did they take? What else am I forgetting? A few nights ago, something happened that made me think all of this wasn't just in my head. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling that same terror I've gotten so used to. But this time it was different. I could hear something, not just the whispers, but actual sounds. Footsteps. They were soft, like they were trying to be quiet. But they were there. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring at the door. I don't know how long I stayed there listening, but eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I had to check. I got up and walked to the hallway, half expecting to see one of those beings standing there waiting for me. I don't know why I thought that. Maybe I just wanted it to be over, but when I opened the door, nothing was there. The house was silent. No one was around. I almost felt like I had imagined it. But the feeling in my gut told me it wasn't. A trick. That pressure, that heaviness in the air. It was real. It was still there. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I've been doing everything I can to find some kind of explanation, but nothing seems to fit. I've read stories, watched documentaries, even tried reaching out to people who have had similar experiences. But it always comes back to the same thing. No one knows what's really going on. People talk about UFO sightings, alien abductions, but no one talks about the aftermath. The lingering dread. The feeling that your life has been altered in ways you'll never fully understand. I've come to realize that this isn't just some odd, isolated incident. There are others out there who've experienced this, and they're just as lost as I am. I've learned to live with the fear, or at least try to pretend that I have. I try to keep busy, keep my mind occupied, but the thoughts are always there, waiting for a moment of weakness to creep back in. And sometimes, I catch myself staring at the night sky again, wondering if they're watching me, if they're waiting for the right time to come back. I don't know if I'll ever truly be free of this. It's like a part of me was taken that day and it's never coming back. Sometimes I think about what I would do if I ever saw one of those beings again. Would I run? Would I try to fight? Or would I just accept it like I did the first time? I don't know if I could handle seeing them again. But part of me wonders if I'm already being watched, if they're just waiting for the right moment to return. The whole thing doesn't make sense. The flashes, the memories, the fear, it's all so disconnected, like I'm stuck in some kind of nightmare that I can't wake up from. And the worst part, I still don't know what they wanted from me. They didn't take me because I was special or because I had some kind of significance. They just took me because they could, and maybe that's the scariest thing of all. Because if they could take me so easily, what's stopping them from doing it again? I can't trust my own mind anymore. I don't even trust the memories I have of that day. They've been twisted, fragmented, rearranged, and now I'm left with nothing but fear. I don't know if I'll ever get answers. I don't know if I'll ever be able to move on. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget what happened to me, and I'll never stop feeling like they're out there, waiting. A few days ago, something happened that finally made me lose all hope. I was walking down the street when I noticed something strange in the sky. At first, I thought it was just another airplane, but it didn't move like one. It didn't move like anything I had ever seen before. I stopped in my tracks and stared at it, my heart racing. It was so high up that I couldn't make out the details, but I swear I saw it shift in a way that no normal aircraft would. I felt that familiar dread, that horrible knot in my stomach, like I was being pulled back into the nightmare. I didn't want to look, I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. But as the object disappeared into the distance, I felt a surge of fear, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I knew in that moment that I would never escape this. No matter how hard I try, no matter how much time passes, I'll never be able to outrun what happened to me. It's like I'm being hunted by something I can't even comprehend, and every time I think I'm safe, it comes back. It always comes back. I don't know how to end this. I don't know what else to say. I wish I could tell you that everything is fine, that it was all just a bad dream, but it wasn't. It was real. And I still don't know why it happened. I still don't know what they want from me, or if they're coming back. I've tried everything to forget it, to move on, but it's always there, lingering in the back of my mind. I don't know if anyone will ever believe me. I don't even know if I believe myself half the time. But I know one thing for sure. Whatever happened to me that day in the forest, it's not over. I don't think it will ever be over. And I don't know if I can survive it again. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.